Susie Smith. So we'll talk about those, and then we'll go kicking and screaming into the Arizona experiments.
You got it. You did a lot of preparations, typed questions.
Look at this, I'm trying to freaking through it here.
I did the questions.
That's the,
So I
that's
hope
the
they're all
questions.
okay. I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
It says here, who's your favourite football team? I don't know what that has to do with anything.
I'll give you my all-time favorite quote, okay?
What's that gone?
Which I will sometimes say that this was said by a great philosopher. It was actually said by Peter Sellers. And the line is, there's a time to speak and a time to be silent, and this is not one of them.
Lovely. Well, my favourite Peter Sellers quote, he said, if I lived my life over again, he said, I'd do everything exactly the same, but I wouldn't read the Magus. Right. Okay. You there?
We're on.
Gary, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
Sure. I'm Gary Schwartz, and I'm presently a professor of psychology, medicine, neurology, psychiatry, and surgery at the University of Arizona. I direct what's called the Laboratory for Advances in Consciousness and Health, and also the Center for Frontier Medicine in Biofield Science. And the work that I do integrates essentially mind, body, and spirit.
Okay, when did you first become interested in working with mediums like Christopher and Alison?
It actually began, I first became interested in working with psychics and mediums like Christopher and John and Alison in the mid-1990s, when I was actually approached by a couple of people who were actually grieving the loss of loved ones, and they wanted to know if it was possible to prove whether their deceased loved ones were still here. And that's what actually started me on the journey.
Okay, tell us a little bit about the work that you do with John Edward and Alison Dubois and Susie Smith, and in a sense, what we're trying to get is how you feel they differ as mediums and psychics from Christopher.
Much of the work that I've done with mediums, such as John Edward and Alison Dubois and Susie Smith, has been investigating the extent to which these individuals and others like them can obtain accurate information about people who have died, and where the explanations cannot be due to what's called fraud or cold reading or rater bias or expectation, or even experimenter bias and expectation. In other words, you want to rule out all these conventional explanations of where this information comes from. And if under those controlled conditions, a person can still obtain accurate information of a deceased loved one's specific information, then you have to rule in some sort of paranormal explanation, including survival of consciousness after death. Now, how these individuals differ from someone like Christopher Robinson is that, first of all, these people are doing this in a waking state, whereas Christopher receives much of his information in dreams. Secondly, the information that mediums typically receive are about deceased loved ones, what happened in the past and maybe what's happening in the present. Whereas Christopher and others like him are dreaming about future events, events that have not yet happened.
Okay, now moving on to Christopher, I gather he rang you, and that's how you first got to meet him. Tell us about those first conversations.
Well, I had never heard of Christopher Robinson, or even someone like Christopher Robinson. And I'll never forget the day I received a phone call in, I think it was early April 2001, from England, from this gentleman with a lovely British accent, claiming to have extraordinary abilities, claiming that he had was able to see this future in his dreams, claiming that he had been assisting in terrorist activity and also in other criminal investigations, claiming that this ability had occurred following a near-death experience that he had, and so on, and also claiming that not only had he written a book about some of his experiences, but also he was desperately interested in being able to document scientifically that what he did was real.
Okay, so how did you, as it were, formulate the format of the experiments? Was that you, or was it combined?
I should first say that just because Christopher called me and said that he wanted to do this research, I mean, I received a lot of strange phone calls, and it took a few phone calls, plus my reading his book, and doing some pilot type experiments, for me to come to the conclusion that Christopher seemed genuine. And not only that, he was willing to come to the University of Arizona. He was willing to fly across the country on his own expense, stay in a hotel at his own expense, because I didn't have any money for this kind of work, in order to show to me and the rest of the world that what he did was real. And he was also willing to do this under controlled scientific conditions. And so because of that, and because of his sincerity, I felt that Christopher deserved the opportunity to show what he could do. Now, this experiment was designed primarily by Christopher and secondarily by me. Now, what I mean by that is that if you're going to test someone who claims to do extraordinary things, it's essential that you design the experiment to be as close as possible to what they actually do. And if you don't design an experiment around their actual skills, you can end up asking people to do things that they actually can't do or don't really represent what they do. So what I did was I asked Christopher to explain to me what are the different kinds of experiences that he had, what did he think that he could do, and then as we discussed this, he and I designed an experiment that would, if it came out positive, and I mean really positive, would therefore lead us to the strong conclusion that there was something very real here. We were not trying to design the perfect experiment. We were trying to design an experiment where, if it worked, it would be sufficiently convincing to then do subsequent research.
Okay, now I'm aware that in the format of the experiment you were very keen to rule out things like telepathy and so on and so forth. So perhaps you can tell a little bit about, because it was rather strange the whole way it worked with the envelopes and Bill Simon and Bill Simon's wife. You know, that seems to be a strange template. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes. The basic design of the experiment was that Christopher was going to dream about going to 10 different places, 10 consecutive days. And I was to pick, a few weeks before the actual experiment, what these 10 places would be. And only I would know what they were. Now what I did was I actually picked 20 places, and then put them in envelopes, sealed the envelopes, and then shuffled the envelopes, so that even though we were only going to be going to 10 of them, what this meant was that even after we'd gone to the first 9, there were still 11 possible other places that we might go, and so therefore there was no way that I could know where we were going ahead of time. So this is ruling out me possibly knowing where we were going to be going. Then, to make sure that there was no way that there could be any, quote, fraud involved, what I did was I then sent the envelopes to my writing partner, William Simon, who also, by the way, belongs to the Magic Castle. He's a professional magician. He knows about fraud and so on, because we wanted to rule out any possibility of fraud. And then what he did was he gave the envelopes to a third person who I did not know the identity of this person. Of course, either did Christopher. What this person did was then shuffled these 20 envelopes, remember they were sealed, and then numbered them from 1 to 20. Envelopes 1 through 10 became the 10 places we would go. Envelopes 11 through 20 became the controls. And so therefore, what would happen is on a given night, Christopher would go to sleep, ask the universe where was he going to be taken on the next day. The next morning, he would then go through and read the material that he received in his dream, plus previous dreams when he had been in England. He would then determine what the themes, what the primary major points were. And only after that information had been recorded and videotaped did I then call Bill Simon, who then contacted the third person, and then this person opened the envelope for that day, informed Bill Simon who it was. Bill then informed me, and it was only at that point that I then knew where we were going.
Now, like all experiments, with hindsight, is there anything you think you would have done differently if you did it again now?
There are things that I wish we could have done that were just not feasible. So, for example, it would have been nice if we could have afforded it, to have someone else who was going along, who was videotaping everything, who didn't know anything about the sites, was kept blind to the information, was collecting all this information just without having our knowledge ahead of time, and then later taking all that information and having it systematically scored blindly. That would have been, quote, the ideal thing to do. The problem was that we didn't have the finances to be able to hire someone to be able to be in that role and also so to keep them secret. So what we had to do was, we knew what we were looking for. We were looking for details that were reflecting that information. And what was critical in order for the experiment to work was that Christopher had to get specific information that would be unique to the settings, that would not be repeated in subsequent days, and that would identify events not only at the site, but were also happening on the way to the site, some of which were, if you would, structural in the site, but some of them were unique events that were happening at the moment that the action was taking place. And it was the combination of that information that ultimately led to the conclusion that this was a real phenomenon.
Now, if you could take us through the days, briefly, if you like, one by one, and also kind of give us a feeling of what you felt at the time. I mean, we have it on videotape that you seemed fairly kind of astounded at the results.
Yes, I allowed myself to be completely me as the experiment was going on. I was not dressed in a jacket. I was not trying to be professorial. I was just a person on an adventure and finding the totality of what was happening continually surprising. And what was interesting was that actually the days started, so to speak, gently, and with each consecutive day, more surprises and more details would come up. It was almost as if there was some intelligence to this whole process, they were gently taking me along, because I could only handle so much surprise per day. For example, on day one, I remember that Christopher just got a few pieces of information. He saw holes, lots and lots of holes. There was a theme of holes and holes. There was also a theme of basin, and there was a theme of water, and no water in this basin. And when I heard that information, I didn't know what he was talking about. To me, that meant nothing. We ended up going to the Desert Museum. I subsequently learned that when you drive into the Desert Museum and you go over the top of the mountains, you literally enter a huge basin, which was once filled with water. It's literally called a basin, which is now empty. And when we got to the Desert Museum, there were holes everywhere. There were holes in the ground of going into caves. The animals were kept in holes. One of my favorite, and many people's favorite demonstrations there and sites are all of these prairie dogs that are living in holes. And you're going to find holes in lots of places. But this place had hole after hole after hole. And if he was going to pick a single place for the theme of holes to be presented, of all the places, there were more holes there than were in any of the other 9 places. I didn't consider that, by the way, a great hit, but it was certainly consistent. So it was, in fact, I rated it on a scale from 0 to 10 as a 9 something. It was very good, but it could have been just chance. But as we went day after day, the details became ever more specific. And then he started getting more information, and the information was not only related to things that were present, but also events that were happening literally on the way to the site or at the site, and then subsequently were also happening after the day was officially over, but in terms of the experiment, but not in terms of the events that we could subsequently verify. Because Christopher, by the way, said that he wasn't able to constrain the dreams at this point. He said that the information was going to be more or less getting information that was within 14 or 16 hours of the day's events.
Okay, of the days, I mean, you mentioned this to us earlier. Which do you think were the most impressive?
Well, there are days that were the most impressive, and then there were days that were transformative for me. And the two most transformative days were days 5 and then days 10. And let's take day 5. On day 5, Christopher received information about a border, and that there were policemen at this border, and there was some sort of a water tank or something around this border. He was seeing boats, lots of boats. He saw a car with 4 flat tires, and this car had no oil, and he wrote in the text mineral oil. What that mean? He also saw something about the car that was reminded him of the London Embassy. He also saw tires along a chain link fence. He saw umbrellas, lots of umbrellas. He saw something to do with the Spirit of God, and also something about me needing a credit card in order to get into the building. Well, when I looked at this collection of material, the only thing I can imagine that we would go to that would fit this was going to be Nogales, which is a border town, and was one of the 20 possible sites. Well, after we get this information, I call Bill Simon, third person opens the envelope, and I'm told that where we're going is to the Gem and Mineral store. And I said, yes, Christopher's finally wrong. The first 4 days he was getting better and better information, but he's finally wrong. At this point I'm rooting for him to be wrong because it's been too accurate. Well, of course I don't tell him where we're going, and he's packed up our cameras. I don't tell Bill what the information is, and then we start going down the street, going the only way I know how to get to this Gem and Mineral store. And about a mile from the Gem and Mineral store, Christopher says, "Are we near the border?" I said, "No, Christopher, I'm sorry, we're not." He said, "But my dreams are very clear. There's something about a border." I said, "Christopher, I'm sorry, there's no border here. The border's at least 40 or 50 miles. Well, he was confused. A little bit further down, we see some policemen off the side of the road. Now, Christopher saw a policeman all across the side of the road. But by the way, there are lots of policemen in these crossings in lots of places. Well, we turn off the side of the road just to look at the policemen. Sure enough, they're doing construction. And behind the construction is a water tank. And what it says on the water tank, I'll never forget this, was Borderland. So now we got Borderland, we got a water tank, we've got policemen. I said, that's interesting. We then go a little bit further along, and a person trailering a boat passes us. We then pass a boat storage yard. Now remember, we're in the desert. What are all these boats around here? We make a right-hand turn to go up the street to the Gem and Mineral store, and there is this stand. I can't remember whether there were 4 canoes or 8 canoes. There's some of these boats lined up. I said, boy, that's a lot of boats. Well, we drive up to the Gem and Mineral store. Remember, Chris did not say Gem and Mineral store. And to the right of the Gem and Mineral store is a car with 4 flat tires. Now, how often do you bump into a car that has 4 flat tires? Well, Christopher is really excited. He goes, right, it's just like I saw in my dreams, he said, in my dreams I could walk right up to the tires and touch the tires. So, of course, what did I do? I went out and actually took some photographs of him. This car did not have any oil. It did not have any, quote, mineral oil. It's in front of a mineral store, Gem and Mineral store. And you know what kind of car it was? It was a Rambler Ambassador. London Embassy Ambassador. I go into the Gem and Mineral store, and I ask him, I said, excuse me, I said, how long has this car been out here? He says, oh, it's been there over 20 years. Now, I didn't need a credit card to get into the store. There were no tires with chain link fence, right? There were no umbrellas that I could see. I didn't see anything with the Spirit of God. Well, we go back to the hotel. We made a list of what we saw. We made a list of what wasn't there. And the experiment is now over. At which point I began to discover I'm running out of digital videotape. And so was Christopher. I said, Christopher, on the way to the lab, would you mind if we stopped at a store that we can get a lot of this inexpensively? So he said, no problem. So I took him to a large, sort of a warehouse store called Costco's. We go to the store, and you need to use your Costco card to get into the store. Christopher said, see, I told you were going to be using a credit card. Now at this point I'm thinking to myself, well, he suggested credit card, he was probably just unconscious. Well, we go in, we look through the tapes, that's not important to the story right now, at which point Christopher says, I'm hungry. And I said, Christopher, but I have to get back to the lab. He said, but Gary, I'm really hungry. I said, well, the only place we have time to eat is if you don't mind eating right here in this large supply store. So I order him a sandwich. We sit down, and he says, look over there. And over there is this chain link fence with all these tires piled up, drawn virtually like he had in his diagram. And then he says, he looks all around, and he says, Gary, he says, look at this. And there are umbrellas. Now we're talking about a lot of umbrellas. There had to be at least 10 umbrellas in there. Huge beach umbrellas, okay? On these beach umbrellas, you have to understand, there's no sun. This is inside, but there's these umbrellas. And then I look at what I see on these umbrellas is writing. There's advertising. And I will never forget this for as long as I live, which may be a very long time, particularly if life after death is real. And what it says was, it was an advertisement for Hebrew National Hot Dogs. And the advertisement was, we answer to a higher authority. In the Spirit of God, question mark?
So,
We just ran out of tape?
Yeah, no, it's in tape end, is it? Yeah, we go back to higher authority, not to
Okay.
higher authority, that's really good. Excellent, this is terrific, Gareth.
I wanted to give you enough
Oh, no,
details.
it's okay.
I know this is very long, and so
Yeah,
it's
no,
okay.
it's terrific. Give me everything. Give me everything.
I'll give you everything, and then we can go
I
back and you can tell me what
cut-
you want to cut things or
No,
whatever.
no, I will
Sure.
cut. I will cut
But
in the
I
edit.
think it's important for you to hear this.
No, no,
You as a
I-
director also to hear this because it's.
No, I totally agree. Totally agree. Matt, I do want to touch on, because the days we decided to cover, again, well, the day here obviously went to the observatory.
Right.
I want you to talk about that as well.
Right, and so ask me some specific questions
Yeah, I
about
will do.
to jog my memory.
Yeah, of course I will.
Okay.
Because obviously, you'll see these other ones are more difficult for us to recreate, if you like.